Okay, so I think maybe we can start. So thank you everyone for joining this session. I'm Cindy Pelou, I'm co-leading APACMed Legal Ethic and Compliance Committee with George Swan, that you will hear speaking later. Today we are delighted to have our sister association AdvaMed joining us to present the new Global Distributors Compliance Toolkit. And we are pleased to introduce our speaker from today's session. So two people from AdvaMed, Ethan Gumper, who is in charge of global ethics, compliance, and governance matters at AdvaMed. Nancy Travis, Vice President, Global Compliance and Governance at AdvaMed. And from the APACMed team, we have Ana Garcia Bello, Group Vice President for Medical Devices at Johnson & Johnson, who is also the chair of APACMed Global Ethics and Compliance Committee. And for the panel discussion, we will also hear from the three vice chairs of the committee. So Campbell Clark from Medtronic, David Rosenberg from Abbott, and Christian Fitt from Stryker. We encourage this session to be interactive, so please post all your questions in the chat bar. And at the end, we will also open up to question with the raise hand function. So you will be able to participate directly to the discussion. That's it on my side. I hand it over to you, Anna, and to get started on the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Cindy, and good morning, everybody, and welcome. Welcome to our meeting today. Thank you for taking the time this morning to join us to learn more about an exciting initiative in the compliance field that was undertaken by industry under the AdvaMed umbrella. I think, of course, everybody is very familiar with AdvaMed, but a very quick reminder that, of course, it is the Advanced Medical Technology Association in the US, and it has over 400 members. And as Cindy mentioned, we are actually very happy to welcome today, despite the late hour in the US, Nancy Travis, responsible for compliance with the AdvaMed, and Ethan, who will be talking a little bit later as well on the toolkit. So Cindy, if you wouldn't mind just to move to the next slide. Okay, perfect. So let me start a little bit with some background about the initiative. So back in 2019, compliance colleagues for those 10 companies that you see there listed on the screen got together within AdvaMed, set up a working group to develop what is called today the Global Distributor Compliance Toolkit. The objectives of the working group were to create some user-friendly and state-of-the-art training materials that medtech companies could not only use to train their distributors, but also to come up with materials and tools that the distributors themselves would be able to use directly in setting up their own compliance programs. If we move to the next slide, please, Cindy. Again, why was the working group set up? As we all know, third-party intermediaries enter into contractor relationships with medtech companies like the ones who are today around the table in this meeting, so that they support the commercial operations of the manufacturers. Those of us who are involved in either ethical, compliance, or legal matters know that the interactions between third-party intermediaries and healthcare professionals or governmental officials remain high-risk areas, as unethical business conduct may arise out of such interactions without necessarily the knowledge of the medtech companies. Such unethical business conduct can not only create exposure for medtech companies, but even more importantly, can also create some situations that negatively impact the principles of independence and integrity that must guide all the decisions on what is the best care for patients. Given the increasing number of third-party intermediaries, and in particular of distributors that medtech companies use around the world, it is important to continue educating the distributors that work with all of us in ethical principles, And we also help them through that education in making the right decisions. If we move to the next slide, Cindy, please. The setup of the working group had in mind to produce tools and resources that could be easily accessed and used by distributors in building their own compliance programs. During a bit over a year, the working group developed different types of tools like infographics, case studies, and some other types of assets that you will see in a couple of minutes that are not only free for use by distributors, but are really specifically tailor-made for medtech distributors. You will see in a couple of minutes that those materials and tools are really very easy to use. They are available in various languages, and for Asia Pacific, we have them available in Chinese and Japanese, and we are considering a couple of other languages for translations. And they are also hosted in a digital platform, again, very easily accessible for all. In addition to all this, these tools have been developed by the private sector through AdvaMed, but they are welcomed by governments. The launch and dissemination of the toolkit is being led by trade associations in collaboration with AdvaMed, for instance, like the meeting that we are having today, and some other initiatives. So with this introduction, I would like to turn it over to Ethan Gamper from AdvaMed, who supported the working group in the development of the toolkit. Ethan will be showing us some examples of materials that are included in the toolkit. Ethan, over to you.
Thanks so much, Anna. And thank you to the whole APACMed team for putting this together. It is absolutely a privilege of mine, not only to come speak to all of you today, not only because I'm very proud of this product, but because I'm of Southeast Asian descent. And although I was born in the States, it's still my mother region. And if you decide to adopt this product after our meeting today, I'll know I did a little something to make it that much better down in Southeast Asia. Enough passion, let's talk about the product. So, as Anna said, over the last 2 years, the working group of our members put together this global compliance toolkit. And what we wanted to do is make it very simple, easy to digest, easy to understand. So we set it on 6 key areas of global compliance for distributors: recognizing government officials, identifying conflicts of interest, preventing bribery and corruption, keeping good books and records, interacting with healthcare professionals and government officials, and lastly, reporting your concern. We then engage in building out materials for each of those topics, but in a very considered way, in a step-by-step process. Step 1 being adopting a code of conduct. Step 2, training your employees. Step 3, establishing clear policies and procedures. 4, communicating those procedures. And then further, a little bit more nuanced training. And lastly, certification, that you are, that you care about compliance and that you're working hard to put together a good compliance program to signal to all of you who you can work with. Next slide, please. So the next couple of pages are examples of the material. All in all, there's about 117 pages worth of material, over 50 assets in this toolkit. So this is just a taste. Right here is a sample code of conduct. And this is a great example of how the work for the toolkit came together, because everyone's got codes of conduct. It's a major accomplishment that so many people have codes of conduct, but so many people do. Associations do, companies do. Everyone's got their own code of conduct. So really, which one are you supposed to sign on to? And how are you supposed to know that once you've signed on, you'll be good to do business? So we brought together that big team. We put together our codes and created a sample code of conduct. Next slide, please. And we put together training material, slides, and slides full of case studies, definitions, examples, you name it, lots of them, but very simple, once again, and easily to translate, and graphically simple, a little pleasing rather, to the eye. Next slide, please. And then the policies and procedures. We're not just saying write up policies and procedures and follow them. We're saying write up policies and procedures, and here's how you make sure everyone follows them, and you can keep a record of the fact that everyone's following them. For example, the sponsorship request form that you see there, which is actually a packet of material for sponsorship request. Due diligence quick check, a nice, quick, simple check. It's all in the title. Again, this is simple stuff, but it's great stuff that didn't exist before. Next slide, please. And then there's communication. On the left is a screenshot of a brochure, do's and don'ts, and places for you to fill in exactly where you can find that company, or that distributor's policies and procedures, and then a form to report a concern. And as you look through all these materials, you'll probably notice that there's a lot of blank spaces. Insert company and event, know where to find your resources, contact us, and all these things, or all these contact options. Earlier, there's places that say insert logo and all of that. And that's not because this is not a finished product. It is a finished product. But the purpose of it is for distributors and small companies, small manufacturers alike, but this was geared towards distributors, for distributors to take this toolkit, make it their own, put their own company's name on it, put their own logo on it. It's not a matter of credit. It's not a matter of branding. It's about pushing out ethical best practices and the right resources to achieve them. Next slide, please. For the training once again, and we didn't just create training in slide form. We took those slides and we made them into infographics. So you can hand them out in addition to having things on the screen for people to watch, give things for people to take home with them that are easy to understand. And all of this was translated as well. Next slide. Then lastly, certification. Right now, we have self-certification. Right now, we have a toolkit, and we want people to embrace the toolkit and have an official way to say, we've embraced the toolkit. So for right now, there's self-certification. But again, if you look, there's a lot of blank spaces because we're not prescribing exactly what people need in their first compliance program. We're just trying to prescribe that you need a compliance program and to work on it and evolve it and strengthen it over time and declare that you have it, to signal to all of you, once again, who you can work with and who you can trust. Next slide, please. Now, the toolkit's just the start. And again, I don't want to make it seem like this is an unfinished product. It is, but the toolkit is just a start. We want it to start with the assets to build the right foundation. And right now we're in a period of collecting feedback, implementing them in foreign markets. And as we refine the toolkit, we can build further on it. We will create training courses, online training courses. So it's not just slides that you have to customize on your own. And eventually we want to have a database for distributors to register to, in order for all of you to very easily, once again, find the people that you can trust. So that is the long and the short of it. Of course, there's a lot more details that I can go into, but I think this is what's going to give you a good taste, and I'd rather just answer questions than continue rambling. Once again, thank you, though, for featuring me here today, and I look forward to further discussing.
Thank you so much, Ethan, and I hope that this has given you more than a flavor and a snapshot about what is really available in this, really great toolkit. As you may have been able to see, we have a very easy to use set of materials, and we can pick and choose, right? I think it is important that all of us within the companies, trade associations as well, we get ourselves familiar with the toolkit and really use it to help our distributors. And some of them, they may be bigger, so they may have an opportunity to have a compliance or a small compliance teams. But many of our distributors are also, quite small, so they don't always have the resources internally to come up with a compliance program. So the beauty of this toolkit is that it's really plug and play for many different topics. They can just take part of the toolkit, they can take the full toolkit. Is all ready to go, as Ethan mentioned. And I think the role of the companies and the trade associations there is really to take a little bit of time to help the distributors to understand what's in there, but also what it is in it for them, not only to get a compliance program, but also to benefit from all the great content that is in there to keep it up and running really very, very quickly. So again, hopefully you are really excited about the toolkit as well as we are, having gone through through it not only today, but also having browsed some of the materials. So maybe this is actually a good moment to open it for Q&A. And the way it works, because this is a webinar, if you have a question, could you please put it and raise your hand? I think, Cindy, there's a raise hand function here in the webinar, and then we can unmute you if you want to ask your question live, or you can also type it. So who has the first question? Who wants to break the ice? There must be one question at least. Okay. Thank you, Luis. So Luis Strong, you want to ask the question? Maybe Cindy, you can unmute him. Hi, Luis. Hopefully you could talk now.
Hi. Thank you, Anna, Ethan, great presentation. I'd like to say that Baxter APAC is already adopting the Distributor Toolkit. So very excited. I loved the material, very comprehensive. That's my immediate feedback, Ethan. Very relevant, very relevant. Now, question is, you mentioned that there is this database of potential trusted distributors. I guess this is a database that's proprietary to AdvaMed, but we're APACMed, right? So what's the plan, perhaps, to be able to have that cross-pollination of sharing there?
Okay, thank you so much for the question, Luis. I don't know, Nancy or Ethan, where you want to answer that question.
I'll answer. There is no specific planning on the database yet. There just isn't. Because we don't have a preset understanding or notion of what it's going to be. We just want to eventually make a centralized list to provide to our members. And that comes way later, and we're going to work all those details out. Those details are defined by what we do right now. As I said, this toolkit's been live for a month and a half, maybe 2 months. So we're still in a feedback period. We're still in a review period. We're trying to understand any gaps and holes in these assets, and through that process, bring together the right stakeholders to bring in at, can't think of a better word, the ground level of the rest of the projects that we're on. So that's all to say that the Institute, which is all the training in the database, is aspirational. It's a goal. And it's going to be defined through the process of working together with our members, our fellow stakeholders like APACMed, people in the government, et cetera, et cetera. So still a lot between now and then.
Luis, maybe while you still have the mic on, so to speak, you said that you have already started launching and using the toolkit. Have you had an opportunity also to discuss it with some of your distributors? And if so, what has been their reaction to it?
I was just going to ask the same question.
Yeah, great. Actually, because it's very new, we are in the stage of adopting it. That's what I say when I say launch. We have shared this with the market. One thing that I think will be very useful for the distributors, they always come back and say, well, you know, we need a code of conduct. You guys want us to have a code of conduct. What does that look like? And we obviously can't prescribe a code of conduct because in certain laws, it could be considered antitrust concerns we have to deal with of prescribing things for distributors. So having an AdvaMed or APACMed recommended code of conduct is a good starting point, and it saves us having to, tread that tenuous water.
Okay, I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that status. I think what would be great, not only for Baxter, but any other companies that are really around the table today, as far as we start kind of socializing the toolkit with distributors, I think it would be great, maybe Georgia and Cindy, that we make it an agenda point for one of our future committee meetings so that people could share a little bit the feedback that they're getting from distributors, and we can share that with AdvaMed so that we start understanding, where the distributors, what is it that they like most? Is there any other suggestions that they're making? So we can get that sharing going in our committee meetings in the next, let's say, 6 months or so. I think it would be a great thing to share with AdvaMed. Okay, thank you so much, Luis, for breaking the ice. I see I have a question here on the chat. How could the other trade associations promote the integration and use of the toolkit by their members? I don't know, do we have any trade association secretariat, for instance, representative on the meeting that would like to comment? Otherwise, I could also pass it over to Georgia or my LT colleagues as well. Anybody from a trade association secretariat who would like to contribute to this question? Let me see if I see anybody raising hand. Okay, maybe not, maybe Georgia, you want to?
Maybe I can jump in the meantime. So thank you, Ethan, for that presentation. Thank you, Anna. So I think there are a few ways, and I think associations play a really critical role, particularly in increasing understanding of the toolkit in such a diverse region. So I think a few steps can be taken. Firstly, having something similar to this, a sharing session with your members. And I think AdvaMed and APACMed would be happy again to be involved. And I think this would really give members an opportunity to deep dive into the kit and, most importantly, ask questions. And perhaps, after this, Ethan, you might be able to talk in more detail about the feedback, the formal feedback mechanism that AdvaMed has set up for the toolkit. I'd also encourage local associations to go on and actually explore the toolkit, then use the feedback function and mechanism that I just mentioned to provide any questions or insights to the AdvaMed and APACMed teams, particularly based on the nuances of your country, your market, and its application there. And then lastly, and Anna touched on this in her introduction, we partnered with AdvaMed to have the materials translated in the first instance into 2 languages, so simplified Chinese and Japanese. I think this is a really important activity to increase and encourage uptake in the local countries. So, this again is something we'd really be happy to have a discussion with local associations on, the potential to likewise partner with them to translate it into their local language. So I think there's a few ideas, but as Anna mentioned, we're really happy to hear your ideas and to support where possible.
Great, thank you, Georgia. Anybody who would like to contribute further to this question? Of course, any ideas would be welcome. I mean, all of us work with distributors, are represented in different trade associations around the Asian region. So we are very much looking forward to getting more ideas of how we can continue raising awareness and use of this toolkit. Any other contributions from anybody on the phone?
I just want to affirm what David said, what Georgia said earlier. The implementation of this toolkit and everything that AdvaMed does is based completely on working with local associations, working with the associations that have the most influence, have the most sway in those countries, that understand those countries, their countries. So as we mentioned, we've translated to Japanese and Chinese thanks to our partnership with APACMed. And we also translated to Spanish and Portuguese. And we are excited to continue translating. But we're not going to translate if we don't think that we have the right tools, the right connections, whatever, to implement in those regions. So I just wanted to affirm all of that and say that very clearly, because I'm excited to get this in other places, but it is our policy to work with those local associations. So if anybody's interested in doing that and talking more about it, let me know.
Thank you for that. Maybe I'm going to address the other question that I have here on the chat to Nancy.
Well, actually, Anna, I see Faye Lee has raised her hand.
Oh, sorry, I don't see that in my screen. So sure, please go ahead, Faye. I think you're unmuted.
Okay, can you hear?
Yes,
you
thank you. Go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, hello, Nancy. Hello, Campbell. Have not seen you for a while. And great stuff. My only question is, where can we get it? I'm sorry if you mentioned this and I missed that. Where can I get the package?
Georgia, Georgia, go ahead.
I will post it. So it's up on the AdvaMed website and the APACMed website. I'll post that now. It's also been made available with HTML code, so you can very easily integrate it into websites. So I'll post the link to our website. We did send out an email a few weeks ago with the code, but we'll send out a follow-up email with that as well in case you'd like to consider integrating it on your own website.
Yes, great stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Faye, for your question. So maybe I have a question again, as I was beginning to ask the question, maybe to Nancy. If you could just share with us, Nancy, how is the implementation going in the other regions? If you could give us a sense of how any launch activities are taking place at the moment. And you could unmute yourself. I think you are on the speaker line. Perfect.
Thanks so much. It's a pleasure to join all of you this evening for me, this morning for you. In the other regions, we are working with partners just as we are here with APACMed to roll out the toolkit. There's an event coming up in Brazil in June where we plan to feature it fairly prominently. We have sent it out through our Inter-American Coalition to all of our partners in Latin America, and I had 2 calls last week with Argentina and with Ecuador representatives just to talk to them one-on-one, and we offered to do a similar presentation like we have here tonight, and so that's something that we're going to be looking at with associations in that region. This is the first, so thank you for being so forward-leaning. Similarly, through APAC, the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Group, the toolkit has gone out to all of the association partners who participate in that initiative. And I also just briefed last week the Global MedTech Alliance on the toolkit. And there was a relatively new group established in that group, which is the Global Compliance Network that has compliance officers from all of the member associations. We are looking at working with MedTech Europe to further push the toolkit out through that network. So those are the initial plans that we have so far, very similar to what we've already been working on with you at APACMed.
Great, thank you, Nancy. And I would add a similar comment as I mentioned earlier around sharing, feedback that you hear also about the implementation in other regions. Anything that you think we could also do here in Asia Pacific to continue raising the awareness. I think it would be great to continue this exchange, through Georgia and Cindy and yourselves, so that we can actually, piggyback on any great ideas that you see in the other regions, and then we continue raising the awareness.
Definitely. I think there's a lot to be learned from one another. So I agree completely.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much, Nancy. I've seen another one here in my chat. I'm just gonna direct this question to my colleagues in the leadership team, Christian, Campbell, and David. So one question that I have for you is, of course, you are familiar with the toolkit. So what elements of the toolkit do you see as most effective for distributors to implement in order to raise the bar on compliance? I don't know, Christian, do you want to get started?
Maybe I can start with this. Thank you, Anna. I think for me, the toolkit, that's the complete package, and that's the set of expectations for a multinational company to start conversations with the distributor. So it's everything in there. And if you start to work with a distributor, you set the expectations, and you would enter into a conversation. And this is how I would say the relationship starts. No, this is not an email to be sent to say, hey, this, comply with this and see you again. This is the start of a conversation. And if we may have some distributors that are that maybe have a code of conduct already, have contracts, but haven't thought in detail about books and records. And hopefully in a conversation with the distributor, then when sharing the package, this topic comes up. The distributor says, well, I'm fine here, I'm fine there, but what do you expect me to do? And then we have a conversation with the distributor and then find a solution. So I would see this, it's a great way, a great means to have a conversation with distributors about the topics that really matter.
Thank you, Christian. Anything to add, Campbell or David, on that?
You go ahead, David.
No, go ahead, Campbell.
I was just going to say, I agree with everything just said. At the end of it, this is a common endeavor that all companies in medical devices face. We have to deal with third parties in many jurisdictions. The same rules being sought to apply. Well, we need to impose the same rules, the same expectations when it comes to compliance on the distributor base. And at different times, I think we are challenged because distributors maintain that, well, maybe different standards apply for different companies they distribute products for. And at the end of it, the goal of the industry has to be to raise compliance standards within the distribution base, who typically are going to be acting as the intermediaries, getting products to customers engaged by industry. And so having a consistent set of standards and keeping it simple in terms of, well, what are the key elements they need to focus on? That benefits the distributors because they're clear, it's efficient. They put in place the processes and procedures they're going to need in order to maintain good relationships with their principals, and it gives, I think, industry a degree of confidence that the standards that we are seeking to impose, they're aligned across industry. They're not particular to any one company, and distributors can't sort of play companies off against one another. So having that strong support of APACMed and AdvaMed, I think distributor compliance has always been one of those big issues that we need to tackle. The code of ethics, I guess, deals with our interactions with healthcare professionals, but it's very focused on the member companies' interactions. And there are a lot of controls in place and a lot of processes and support in place to make sure the compliance standards are understood. Distributors have always presented an increasing challenge. And so the fact that the industry associations have gathered together, they're willing to put time and effort into coming up with a consistent set of processes, procedures, laying out the expectations. It actually makes our job easier. It creates real meaning, I think, for the industry associations. And I do think it makes life easier for the distributors because there's no doubt in terms of what are the standards to which they're going to be held. So that's I think it's a really positive development. It addresses one of the key risks we all identify. The proof is going to be in terms of how well socialized the toolkit is, and it's really up to companies to make it available. It becomes a first reference point in engaging with distributors, and actually has support of the majority of APACMed member companies because at different levels they've contributed to the toolkit.
Thank you, Campbell. David.
Yeah, I would even just take Campbell's point even one step further, and I don't know that we've really talked about this, and certainly I'm not giving legal advice to anybody, but I also think that the toolkit has the potential to, as it gets rolled out across the region and other regions, to set a bit of a bar for what it means to be giving good compliance support to our distributors, kinds of training, ways in which we ask them to adopt principles of compliance. And, knock on wood, God forbid, one of us is hit by an investigation someday by an enforcement authority. I would hope that this toolkit, if it is broadly adopted and used, could be something that we all could point to say we have made good faith efforts to instill notions of compliance. And so I think it's in everybody's interest to have principles like this and tools like this adopted far and wide.
Yeah, I think I agree with all the points. I think they're all very relevant. And I think at the end of the day that we've been trying to convey during the presentation today is that this is something that is there to be used. Of course, this is not something that anybody in the trade association in AdvaMed or in APACMed, we are dictating. Of course, we cannot dictate. We cannot really impose it as a must do. However, hopefully through, again, getting familiar with the toolkit, with the resources that are in the toolkit, all of us will realize that it is really very well done. It's very modern in the look. It's very easy to use. And at the end of the day, it makes the life probably of the compliance professionals within all the companies a little bit easier, especially maybe, companies that may have, of course, they're all compliance programs, but may not have all these different materials that are included in the toolkit. it makes it really easy for them, as Christian was mentioning earlier, to have those conversations with the distributors. And again, this is not a prescription exercise, it's really a facilitation exercise to make things easier for companies. And maybe I see on my chat a related question. And again, I don't know, Campbell or David or Christian, if you want to comment on this one, is what response would you give to a distributor who would like to adopt only one part of the toolkit, but not the full toolkit? What would be your answer to that question? Christian, you're unmuted.
Yeah, maybe I can answer this. It links directly to what I said. No, it's great actually. No, let's have a conversation. It shows that the distributor takes it seriously, and the distributor still wants the collaboration. If not, would have just walked away and not work with you, or work with you and not care and say, well, and not care about the implementation of the toolkit. So the fact that the distributor comes back and wants to have a conversation, I think that's a good thing. I would let's see what the concerns are. No, maybe there are those topics for audit rights. How can we make sure that if there's an audit, sensitive information can be kept separate and not be accessed by the company? I mean, there are solutions to many aspects. So I would actually welcome the conversation.
Yeah, likewise. At the end of the day, it will inform us as to what are the sticking points, and obviously it depends on which part of the toolkit the distributor is reluctant to adopt. But that will actually inform us about maybe practices within a particular market, what other distributors are doing within that market, and we can then try to work out, well, how do we address that? If it presents a compliance-related risk for the principle, the fact that your distributor isn't wanting to adopt certain parts of the toolkit, well, it does invite that further discussion and investigation. At the end of it, dialogue, as Christian said, it's a positive thing because it shows they're reading the toolkit, they're thinking about it, they're thinking about implementation. Because none of these things change overnight. The toolkit isn't going to change overnight. The compliance risks that all companies face when we engage third-party intermediaries. But having that consistent dialogue with the broader distributor base, I think is a really positive next step. And also agree with David's point that at the end of it, if companies are making all endeavors to engage with distributors on compliance-related risks, that helps the companies themselves. It demonstrates an active management of distributors when it comes to maintaining and raising compliance standards.
Yeah, thank you, Campbell and Christian. And I think just an element to build on your points as well. Like with any indeed conversation with the distributors, I mean, if they have indeed a reluctance on something, that is really already a red flag, right? And this is something that would help us indeed to identify where are the points that we need to pay more attention in that relationship with the distributor, or just to understand again, there's maybe something there that we are not seeing in their practice, even in their due diligence could have been overlooked. And this is really, again, another tool to help us identify some kind of early red flags, if that was the conversation, that they wouldn't want to adopt part of the toolkit or part of our compliance programs. I see here on the chat a question, an anonymous question, and I think maybe Nancy, this is one that you could help with as well. Will the toolkit contain resources to help local trade associations convince distributors or the industry to adopt a compliance program, such as the statistics on regional violation, fines, legislations, or perhaps case law that can demonstrate the urgency of adopting a compliance program? This is actually quite broad and even broader than the toolkit, but any thoughts from your end?
Sure, that's an excellent question. And the short answer is no. The toolkit is geared towards distributor companies themselves, and it's tools for the distributor companies to use to implement their own compliance programs. There is other guidance that AdvaMed developed jointly with MedTech Europe and a few other associations that gives companies ideas about how to better engage with distributors and convince them to adopt a high standard compliance program. And we have worked with the Americas Initiative and the APAC Initiative to give associations resources to make these arguments. But as we've been talking, I've been thinking that that guidance for the companies probably could use some revising. It's a little old now, and it might be a good idea for one of our next projects to be to actually develop some guidance for associations. The kinds of statistics you're talking about are easily researched online, and they do differ from country to country. So I'm not sure that we will be pulling that together broadly, but we certainly could do some of that initial work. That's a very good suggestion. One thing I will mention that we had been doing prior to the COVID pandemic is AdvaMed had been working with association partners to do in-person training programs with multinational companies and the distributors. And we would we have a standard curriculum. Much of it actually is reflected in the toolkit, in the slides and the materials that are in there. But one of the things that the in-person training does really well, that is indeed hard to replicate, is it addresses the issue of the culture of compliance. If you have a distributor training program, we usually did a 1.5-day program, and all the multinational companies would all send their distributors to the training program. They told them they had to go. They went themselves, and usually we would be able to get a government speaker to come in. And so we would have the program, and the distributors could see that all the other distributors were there, all the multinational companies were there, the government was there. We would bring in a local law firm to also talk about the local legal environment. And these kinds of messages were exchanged at that particular event. And we do feel like that had some power. It is difficult to fly all over the world and run these training programs. So one of the reasons we created the toolkit was to have some online resources. And we have been brainstorming about ways to use webinars perhaps to try and at least recreate some of the material. And when we have our program in Brazil in June, we are doing a hybrid format, and it's going to be kind of a test case to see if you can have a format where you have people kind of piping in by webinar and along with people there in person. And that might be a way forward to do some of these programs that address some of the cultural issues and kind of help with the side of convincing that it's a good idea. One last thing I'll say on this topic is we've also been working with other governments through our work in the Asia Pacific and APAC and also in Latin America to try and encourage governments to provide rewards for adherence to a code of ethics. And these could include incentives like requiring a code of ethics to participate in procurement programs if they're government run, requiring a code of ethics to get a product registered. That doesn't apply as much to distributors, or even just getting a kind of some compliance credit if something does go wrong. So that's another piece of it that we're also working on, is to try and take the government side to see if the governments themselves can play a role in encouraging medtech companies, distributors to adopt these kinds of codes. So it's a little bit of a long-winded answer, but that's what we're working on.
Thank you, Nancy. And
if I could add to that, Anna, sorry. If I could add to that, we keep talking about how we're in a feedback phase, and we talk about how we want to bring this to all the next levels collaboratively. This is a crowdsourced thing, right? We're all teaching the same laws. Now we're going to be teaching those laws from the same toolkit. And I can't get you to do this. Maybe it's just asking a favor, but it would be so helpful to us and the entire industry if you end up training on the toolkit, hiring a law firm to talk about it more, or just training on yourself. If you end up recording that, especially if it's in your own local language, it would be absolutely fantastic if you sent it to us so we can put it up on the website and create this body of language, statistics, teaching on the toolkit, or rather on the laws that the toolkit teaches.
Thank you.
Send them my way if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you. And Nancy, I was just going back to one of the points that you mentioned earlier that I was indeed going to mention as well. When it comes to initiatives around distributors as well, the APAC work, I think, has been pre-pandemic, of course, has been really very much geared towards that as well. And I think there are probably many companies around the table here who have been part of these APAC initiatives in the past, where we have been actually many of us, conducting sessions for distributors within the SME type of chapter, let's say, within APAC. We hope that comes back once we go back to some normality. And that's, again, it's one of the many efforts that are going on within the industry, also with trade associations and member companies' participation, that has been going on for probably, a little bit over, 9 years or even more. So very good. And I think also, Nancy, you touched upon an element that answers one of the questions that I see here on the chat, which is, will this essentially be part of the procurement selection requirements? I think, as you mentioned, at the end of the day, each company has their own framework about how to select distributors. But as you said as well, I mean, there are initiatives within, as you said, AdvaMed and some other fora to really continue talking about, the beauties and actually the benefits of having compliance programs and using some of the principles, of course. And I think some companies definitely incorporate those principles into their due diligence processes. But again, this is not something that is really mandated. No trade association can mandate things like that. Of course, when somebody joins AdvaMed or APACMed, they sign, of course, a code of conduct. So whatever company that is a member of a trade association has to already accept that bar, for sure. So when you go even one step further in your selection of your distributors, I think all the members are expected to continue with those principles. But as far as, determining what will be your due diligence program, et cetera, for distributors, that each company is free to do it the way that they feel, most appropriate. Anything you want to add, Nancy, in there?
I would just say this is literally a tool that you have an option to use. It absolutely is up to each company to determine what's going to work best for them.
Okay, very good. So let me look at the chat again to see whether I'm missing any other questions. Okay, here, I see another one from an anonymous attendee. Are there plans for APACMed or AdvaMed to share distributors' compliance concerns or red flags among us so we can always do a cross-reference check? If yes, is there a timeline? If not, any reason we can't do that? Maybe I can invite my LT colleagues to share any perspectives. I think probably we all think in the same answer. So any of you who want to contribute to that one?
Yeah, I'm happy to take this one, and it's come up from time to time. And I think we've all, as a APACMed association, we've been somewhat resistant, I think, to creating a database of, say, compliance red flags involving distributors. At the end of it, it would potentially expose APACMed and its membership to risk of enforcement action, because obviously, if a particular distributor was identified with a red flag such that they lose all their business, they're going to be aggrieved by that, particularly if a lot of the red flags, at the end of it, it's information companies come by. Could they sustain a successful legal challenge by a distributor if they're to maintain that the reason for maybe terminating that arrangement was because of the red flag? Oftentimes we're acting on the best information we have, but it's not the information that you could necessarily rely on if you were to be before a judge. So I think that's been one of the reasons why, from an industry association, well, certainly for APACMed, and I won't answer for AdvaMed, we've been resistant to do that. But what I would say is, through APACMed, I think probably all of us within the Legal Ethics and Compliance Committee have at times corresponded with one another in terms of particular, issues they may have identified with a distributor, or maybe they hear a distributor's been terminated by one company. Are there any reasons for that we need to be concerned about? So those kinds of informal exchanges of information at the legal compliance level, I think, do exist, and I think that's helpful. But anything more structured than that, I think, would create legal risk for the companies and for the association. So that's my perspective. But anyone else got got a different view. Or
Thank you, Campbell. David or Christian, anything to add from your end?
No.
Okay. All right. No, I agree with you, Campbell, and I think even those informal contacts, you know, they do exist from time to time. You know, probably all of us have gotten a call from a colleague in the compliance committee about, I heard through the grapevine that potentially your company may have terminated the distributor. I think, again, even informally, you know, each of us, of course, will need to make the judgment call about what can and cannot be shared, because indeed this is a very sensitive topic to discuss, even informally, from the antitrust perspective, from the confidentiality perspective. So again, I think it's important, as we mentioned also in the past in our committee meetings for the Legal Ethics and Compliance Committee within APACMed, it is important that we are creating this kind of community within APACMed, that all of us in the compliance and legal field, you know, have the opportunity to pick up the phone and say, listen, I would like to kind of get a little bit more understanding about this particular question. And then again, there will be probably boundaries about what can be and cannot be shared. But again, I think it's always useful to at least have that conversation.
And what I'd add to that is, if we're doing risk rating on distributors, if you've had a contact from another company suggesting that we exercise caution, again, it may mean that particular distributor is elevated on the list of distributors maybe to be audited or to get a closer review. So it does help us, I think, manage our compliance program, because we all have limited resources. So it gives us a heads up that we can, you know, maybe address an issue that could be a problem in our company as well. So Nancy, you know, AdvaMed, I think there have been sort of informal committees of AdvaMed. Obviously, you're dealing with global compliance officers, and I know at different times the recommendation has been it should be at the global compliance officer level, that issues around, sometimes even former employees, issues around distributors, they can be discussed, and then that information kind of filters down to the relevant business and region. Do you want to just give your perspective?
Sure. Thank you. Yeah, I would agree with all of the reasons that you cited, Campbell, for why we do not have a database of red flags. Those all apply for AdvaMed as well. It's just there's too much liability, too much potential liability concerns, too much, you know, the quality of the information, as you say, is not something that might always hold up in the court of law. So we have not done that. We do have, as Ethan mentioned earlier, a very basic list of distributors who have taken our training. So that's the closest we've come to sharing, I won't even say the blessing of distributors. It's just the fact that they came to our training, but it is still a good list. It's a good place to start. We've have traditionally posted on our website contact information for compliance officers as part of our our certification process for our code of ethics. And if there are disputes, we encourage the compliance officers to work them out amongst themselves. This philosophy was originally applied to if you saw a violation by a med tech company, but it kind of extends to the distributor space as well. We definitely encourage the compliance officers to communicate with one another and communicate informally and share the information that they can. Our chief compliance officers meetings do focus on the exchange of best practices. We don't talk about individual business partners at those meetings for the same sort of liability issues and antitrust issues and all of the above. But you know, what compliance officers talk about one-on-one is their business. So we try to provide a venue where people can make the contacts that will help them in their career activities, their business activities. So that's, we really kind of keep an arm's length from all of that. We are, though, as Ethan also alluded to, actively looking at ways to build a more robust database that could include more information that will help companies make their decisions. But at the end of the day, the decision about which distributor to use is a company decision.
Hey, Nancy, there's a question in the Q&A about, that sort of relates to this, I think, about whether there are ways to know whether a distributor has adopted or implemented the toolkit. And, you know, do you have any plans to create a mechanism where distributors or companies can report back to you when somebody has implemented all or part of the toolkit, and that could be shared, or even some kind of a certification process. You know, a distributor could get a certification for adopting this or that. Any thoughts on that?
A part of the toolkit is a self-certification. The distributors can say, we're doing this, and you know, we're kind of, at this point, we're taking their word for it. We are looking at ways to beef that up, but that's what we have right now.
Right.
Thank you, Nancy. I don't see any other questions on the chat, and actually we are like 3 minutes away from the end of the call. I just wanted to turn it over to Georgia, but first I would like to really thank all the participants for you know, for all the engagement, being here, for all the questions, and also, you know, Nancy, Ethan, David, Campbell, and Christian, thank you as well for your contributions. Georgia, back to you.
Thank you. And I'll echo Anna's message. A huge thank you to the AdvaMed team, Ethan and Nancy, for joining us today, and also sharing the toolkit with us and collaborating with us on this important area. And of course, to our leadership team, Anna, David, Christian, Campbell, thank you for sharing your insights. So, you know, again, to reiterate, we think from an APACMed perspective, this is a really important tool to help with our objective of raising standards around ethics and compliance in the region. So for the associations on the call, please do reach out to Cindy and I if you'd like to have a follow-up discussion, if you'd like to host a similar webinar, we're happy to support. And then also for the member companies on the call. So we really encourage you to reach out to the local associations you're part of, start a discussion, and feel free to bring us in along the way. So we'll make a recording of this session available on the APACMed members website. So please do feel free to access that and also share it with the local associations. And we'll also reshare the link to the toolkit on our respective websites and that HTML code, which is the accessible format that's easily integrated on websites. So thank you to you all for participating. And we look forward to your feedback and your outreach after this.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good rest of the day and evening for Nancy and Ethan. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
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 Bye, everybody.